I didn't say a word. I didn't cry. I just picked up my purse, took my daughter's hand, and walked out of that restaurant like I hadn't just heard the most humiliating thing my own brother had ever said to me. He called after me, said I was being dramatic, said I was ruining everything. Again. I kept walking. 3 months earlier, I had wired him $42,000, every cent of it. Let me back up, because if I just drop that number without context, you're going to think I was stupid, and maybe I was. But I want you to understand how it happened, because it didn't happen all at once. It never does with family. It happens in layers, slowly, the way water carves through stone. You don't notice the damage until one day you reach down and there's nothing left. My brother is 4 years older than me. Growing up, he was the one our parents pointed at. The smart one, the one with the plan. He went to college on a partial scholarship, worked nights at a hotel front desk, got his business degree, and spent the next 10 years building a catering company from the ground up. I was proud of him. Genuinely proud. Even when he forgot to call on my birthday. Even when he didn't come to my college graduation because he had a contract to fulfill in Phoenix. I told myself that's what it meant to be driven. That's what sacrifice looked like. I finished school, got a job in HR at a mid-sized tech company outside of Columbus, and built something small and steady. Not glamorous, but mine. Then my brother met his fiancée. I liked her at first. She was sharp, funny, had opinions about things. She worked in event planning, which made sense. She had that quality of someone who was always mentally arranging the furniture in every room she walked into. My brother was softer around her, laughed more. I thought she was good for him. What I didn't see, not right away, was that she was also quietly rearranging him. By the time they got engaged, he had started talking differently, about his family, about money, about what he deserved. Not in a grateful way. In a way that made everything sound like it had been owed to him all along and just hadn't been delivered yet. The catering company had hit a rough patch. A big venue contract fell through. 2 of his key staff left within the same month, and the refrigeration unit in his main kitchen broke down and needed a full replacement. He told me the number over the phone on a Tuesday night, $38,000 minimum, to get the business stabilized and keep it from folding. I asked him if he'd talked to a bank. He said the loan process would take too long and he'd lose the few contracts he still had. I asked him if he'd talked to his fiancée's family. He paused, said they weren't in a position to help. I found out later that he never asked them, that her parents had a lake house in Michigan and a retirement portfolio that was doing just fine. But I didn't know that then. What I knew was that my brother's voice sounded like it did when we were kids, and something had gone badly wrong, that particular flatness that meant he was holding everything back by his fingernails. So I said yes. I didn't give him 38. I gave him 42 because I ran the numbers and figured he needed a buffer, and because I had been sitting on some savings I'd been building since my divorce 2 years prior, and because he was my brother, and because some part of me still believed that meant something permanent and mutual. We didn't put it in writing. I know how that sounds, but it was family, and he said he'd pay me back within 18 months, and I believed him the way you believe someone you've known your whole life, the way you believe a story you've heard so many times it stops feeling like a story and starts feeling like fact. He paid me back $4,000 over the following 4 months, then stopped. When I brought it up, he said things were still tight. I said, okay. I waited another 2 months. He said the same thing. I waited. Then he stopped mentioning it at all. And somehow that became the new normal. The way things that never get resolved eventually just become part of the landscape. And then the engagement party invitations went out. It was a Saturday afternoon event at an upscale venue in downtown Columbus. The kind of place with exposed brick and Edison bulbs and a raw bar and a signature cocktail named after the couple. I got my invitation in the mail like everyone else. Hand-lettered envelope, heavy cardstock. My daughter, who's 7, had been talking about it for weeks. She'd picked out a dress, pink with a bow she kept adjusting in the mirror. She adored my brother. He was the cool uncle who did voices and let her eat ice cream before dinner when he babysat. She didn't know anything about the $42,000 or the silence that had grown around it. She just knew the party was coming, and she was going. We got there a few minutes early because I'd promised her we could watch people arrive. I was holding her hand in the parking lot when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my brother. "Hey, just so you know, tonight is actually adults only. We should have mentioned it sooner. Sorry for the confusion." I stopped walking. I read it again. Adults only. Adults only. I looked down at my daughter in her pink dress with the bow she'd spent 15 minutes adjusting, and I felt something go very quiet inside me. I called him. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I texted back, "When was this decided? The invitation didn't say that." He responded 11 minutes later, "It's just how the venue is set up. Kids get antsy. You know how it is. You can still come. Just leave her with someone." It was 4:47 in the afternoon. The party started at 5. There was no one to call. My babysitter was out of town. My neighbor, who would have helped in a heartbeat, was at a family thing in Dayton. There was no one. And even if there had been, it wouldn't have fixed what was actually happening. Because it wasn't about logistics. It was about the fact that my daughter's name had been on the invitation list for 2 months, and no one had called to say the rules had changed, and the text arrived while we were standing in the parking lot with the building visible from where I stood. I drove home. My daughter cried in the back seat for about 10 minutes, then fell asleep with her cheek against the car door. I sat in the driveway for a while after I parked, not ready to go inside yet, just sitting there in the dark. That night, I called my mother. She said she was sure it was just a mix-up. She said I shouldn't take it personally. She said my brother had a lot on his plate right now with the business and the wedding coming up, and could I please just be understanding, just this once, because it was such an important time for him. I asked her if she knew I had given him $42,000. She said she knew he'd borrowed some money, yes. I asked if she thought that was something to consider when deciding how to treat me. She said I shouldn't make everything about money. I said goodnight and hung up. The wedding was scheduled for late September at an inn about 40 minutes outside of Columbus, a converted farmhouse with a barn reception space, the kind of venue that shows up in every Ohio wedding Instagram account. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was told I had been invited. No +1. I'd been divorced for 2 years and wasn't seeing anyone, but I was on the list. My daughter was not mentioned. I reached out to my brother directly, 3 weeks before the date, to ask calmly whether children were welcome. He said the wedding was child-free, venue preference. Sorry for not saying something sooner. I asked if there would be any exceptions. He said no. I had gone back and forth on it for days, whether to go or not go, whether it meant something to show up, or whether showing up meant I was agreeing that everything was fine, that the $42,000 had dissolved into goodwill, that my daughter being texted out of a party at the last minute was something I'd moved past. I decided to go, because I didn't want to be the one who broke the family, because I still believed, stupidly, that maybe in person I could find a moment to talk to him, to say plainly, we need to figure out the money, and I need to know you see me as more than the person who fills in the gaps. I drove out on a Sunday in September, wore a blue dress, left my daughter with my neighbor who was back from Dayton and absolutely willing to help, and who could tell from my face that something was not quite right but was too kind to ask. I got to the inn at 3:15. The ceremony was at 4. I parked and walked toward the entrance. A woman I didn't recognize was standing at the door with a clipboard. She smiled when she saw me coming. I gave her my name. She looked down, looked up, looked down again. "I'm so sorry," she said in a tone that told me she had been briefed for exactly this moment. "I don't see you on the list for the ceremony. You're on the list for the reception only, and that starts at 6. I stared at her. "I'm his sister," I said. She smiled again, the same smile. "I understand. I'm really sorry. I was just given the list." I stepped to the side. Called my brother. Voicemail. Called his fiancée. Voicemail. Stood in the parking lot of a farmhouse in my blue dress for 4 minutes while guests I didn't know walked past me and through the door I was not allowed to enter. Then his fiancé's father came out. I had only met him twice, once at a dinner, once at a birthday gathering. He was a quiet man, the kind who listened more than he spoke and had a way of looking at a situation like he was reading its margins. He saw me standing in the parking lot and stopped. "Are you waiting for someone?" he asked. "I was told I'm not on the ceremony list," I said. I was keeping my voice very steady. "I'm on the reception list." He looked at me for a moment. Then he looked at the door. Then back at me. "Who put together the guest lists?" he asked, though I was pretty sure he already knew. "My brother and your daughter," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "Come with me," he said. I found out later what happened inside. He went straight to the wedding coordinator, asked to see both lists, saw my name deliberately moved from the ceremony to the reception. It was handwritten in different ink, which meant it had been changed after the original list was submitted. He walked to where his daughter was finishing getting ready, knocked on the door and told her, quietly, that what she had done was not something he was willing to pretend he hadn't seen. I don't know exactly what was said. I wasn't there. What I know is that his daughter came out to the parking lot about 8 minutes later. She didn't apologize. What she said was that she didn't want my financial situation to cast a shadow on her wedding day, that she'd heard about the loan and she didn't think it was appropriate for me to be there hovering when there was an outstanding debt between families. I want you to understand the precision of that. The debt was between me and my brother. I had lent him money, and somehow that had been reframed as my financial situation, as something shameful I was dragging into a room I shouldn't have been allowed to enter. I looked at her for a moment. Then I turned around, walked back to my car, and drove away. My phone rang 20 minutes into the drive. It was her father. "I owe you an apology on behalf of this situation," he said. "What happened today was wrong. I want you to know that I'm aware of that, and I'm not willing to let my family be associated with it quietly." I asked him what that meant. He said he would be in touch. I thanked him and hung up, and then I cried for a while, because I'd been holding it in since the parking lot and because there's something about unexpected decency from a near stranger that breaks you open in a way cruelty never quite manages. My brother called that night. I let it go to voicemail. He said I had embarrassed the family by causing a scene. I replayed the message 3 times trying to figure out what scene he meant, given that I had stood in a parking lot and then driven home, but I couldn't find it. My mother called the next morning, said she'd heard there had been an incident, said she hoped I understood that weddings were stressful and people don't always make perfect decisions under pressure, said she was sure my brother hadn't meant anything by the list situation, that it was probably just confusion. I asked her if she wanted to hear what his fiancé had said to me in the parking lot. She said she didn't think going over it would help anyone. I said I needed some space. She said she hoped I wouldn't take too long because family was important. I hung up and sat with that for a very long time. Here's what I had that nobody knew I had. When I transferred the money 18 months earlier, I had sent it in 2 installments. The first was $20,000 with a text message exchange immediately before the transfer where my brother wrote, explicitly, "This is a loan. I'll have it back to you within 18 months. Thank you for saving me. I mean that." The second installment was $22,000, preceded by an email, his idea actually, because the amount was larger, where he laid out a rough repayment schedule and referred to the full $42,000 as a personal loan in writing. I hadn't planned to use any of it. I genuinely hadn't. I kept those records the way you keep things you hope you'll never need. Tucked away, not thought about, present only as a quiet assurance that the truth existed somewhere outside my own memory. But standing in that parking lot listening to his fiancée talk about my financial situation, something shifted. I called a lawyer on Monday morning. Not a family lawyer, a civil attorney who handled small claims and contract disputes. I explained the situation. She asked for the documentation. I sent it. She called me back 2 hours later and told me I had a solid case for a personal loan recovery claim. The written communications were clear, the amounts were documented, And the partial repayment of $4,000 over 4 months actually worked in my favor because it demonstrated acknowledgement of the debt. She also told me that in Ohio, I could file in small claims for amounts up to $6,000, but for the remainder, $38,000, I'd need to file in a general civil division. She said the case was straightforward enough that it was unlikely to go to trial. Most defendants settle when they see the documentation. I filed 6 weeks after the wedding. My brother called the day he was served. The tone was different this time. Not hurt. Not angry in that performative way. Something underneath that. Something smaller. He said he couldn't believe I would do this to the family. I said I hadn't done anything to the family. I had filed a civil claim to recover a documented personal loan that was 18 months overdue. He said this would destroy their marriage before it even started. I said I was sorry to hear that, but I didn't think a civil filing about a pre-existing debt was something that destroyed marriages. I thought what destroyed marriages was already there. He hung up. His wife, she was his wife now, the ceremony had happened without me, called me 2 days later. She was not quiet this time. She was not precise. She told me I was jealous, that I had always been jealous, that I couldn't stand to see my brother happy. She said she would make sure I never had a relationship with my nieces or nephews. She said my mother agreed with her. I let her say all of it. When she was done, I said, "The loan documents are in the hands of my attorney. Any further contact from you or my brother should be directed to her." Then I hung up, and that was the last time I spoke to either of them for 11 months. Her father reached out by email a few weeks after I filed. He said he wasn't involved in the legal matter and wasn't trying to be, but he wanted me to know that he had been honest with his daughter about his feelings, and that he hoped things would be resolved fairly. He said he had a daughter too, and if someone lent her $42,000 and she treated them the way my brother had treated me, he would want to know. I wrote back and thanked him. We ended up exchanging a few emails, nothing significant, just two people acknowledging what they'd seen. My brother and his wife settled 4 months after the filing. $37,000. They negotiated $1,000 off the remaining balance, and my attorney advised me to accept it because the cost and time of pursuing the full amount through trial wasn't worth $1,000. They paid in 2 installments. The second cleared on a Thursday afternoon in June, and I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of my daughter's school when my banking app sent the notification. I stared at it for a moment. Then I looked up and watched my daughter come through the school doors with her backpack bouncing, scanning the lot for my car. When she spotted it, she broke into a run the way she always does, like she hasn't seen me in weeks instead of 7 hours. I got out and opened my arms, and she crashed into them, and I held on a little longer than usual, and she didn't mind. She never found out what happened. She knows that things got complicated with her uncle, that we don't see him much anymore. She knows that some grown-up things are hard to explain. She asked me once if I was sad about it, and I said sometimes, a little, yes. She said she was sorry. Then she asked if we could get milkshakes, and I said yes. We got milkshakes. My mother and I are in a quiet place right now. Not estranged, exactly. We talk on the phone every few weeks. She doesn't mention my brother's name, and I don't ask about him. There are whole shapes of things we don't touch. The way you learn to rearrange your steps around furniture you've stopped bothering to move. I don't know what she tells herself about what happened. I hope it's something that gives her peace. I'm not being sarcastic when I say that. I genuinely hope she's found a way to arrange it that doesn't keep her up at night, because she's my mother and I'm not interested in her suffering. But I also know what I know. I know that when I needed someone to say this is wrong, you don't deserve this, the person who said it was a man I barely knew in a parking lot outside a barn. I know that $37,000 came back to me, not because my family did the right thing, but because a piece of paper existed that made doing the wrong thing too costly. I know that my daughter ran toward me across that parking lot like I was the only fixed point in her world, and I understood in that moment that being that for her was the only thing that mattered, and that I had spent years trying to earn a version of that from people who had already decided I wasn't worth the effort. I don't think about my brother much anymore. I think about what I should have demanded from the beginning. Not loyalty, not gratitude, not love, because you can't demand those things and have them mean anything. Just basic accountability, just the ordinary decency of the signature on a piece of paper that says, I see what you're giving me and I intend to honor it. I have a good attorney now. I have a clean record of every significant financial transaction I've ever made. I have a daughter who runs toward me. That's enough. Most days, that's more than enough. I keep thinking about that parking lot, the way the gravel looked in the afternoon light, the way I stood there in my blue dress holding my phone, calling numbers that rang to voicemail, while strangers walked past me through a door I wasn't allowed to enter. What strikes me now, looking back, isn't the anger. The anger came and went. What stays with me is how long I made myself small to avoid causing inconvenience to people who had no trouble causing it to me. I told myself that was loyalty. That was love. I think now it was something closer to fear. Fear that if I asked for basic fairness, I would lose what little I had left of the family I grew up believing in. The thing about lending someone money without documentation isn't just a financial mistake. It's a statement about how you see yourself. It says, my word is enough, my trust is enough, I don't need a safety net because surely the people I love won't let me fall. I made that statement twice, once with $20,000 and once with $22,000. And both times I was wrong. Not because my brother was a stranger. Because I had convinced myself that love made accountability unnecessary, when really accountability is just love made legible. What saved me wasn't luck. It was a paper trail I almost didn't create. It was a text message where my brother wrote, in his own words, "This is a loan." It was an email with a repayment schedule. I hadn't sent those things to protect myself. I'd sent them because the amounts were large and it felt responsible. I didn't know then that responsibility would end up being the one thing standing between me and a complete loss, financial and otherwise. Her father came outside that day because he had the character to do it. That's the only explanation. He didn't know me well. He had no obligation. He came out because he looked at what was happening and decided he wasn't willing to be a bystander to it. I've thought about him a lot since then. Not with gratitude exactly, though I am grateful, but with something more like recognition. He showed me what it looks like when someone leads with their conscience instead of their comfort. My daughter ran toward me across a parking lot 6 months later, backpack bouncing, and I held on longer than usual. She didn't know why. She just let me. 7 years old and she already understands that sometimes people need an extra moment, and she gives it without being asked. That's the thing I want to carry forward. Not the legal victory, not the $37,000 that came back to me in 2 installments on an unremarkable Thursday. Those things mattered, but they're not the point. The point is that I held my ground long enough to see the truth clearly, I was clear-eyed enough to document it when it mattered, and I was steady enough to follow through even when following through felt like detonating something I'd spent years trying to hold together. You can be a generous person and still require honesty. You can love your family and still hold them to a written agreement. You can walk away from a parking lot with your dignity intact, even when you're the only one who seems to care about yours. I still have that blue dress. I haven't worn it since. But I haven't thrown it out either. Some things you keep not because they bring you joy, but because they remind you of the moment you finally stopped pretending the ground was solid when you could feel it giving way. That moment, for me, was worth every dollar it cost to get there.